There's a few news links. This is a amount of coronavirus found in wastewater in sewage treatment plants. This is considered an early indicator. Obviously it reaches all kinds of people, including people that don't have symptoms and aren't getting tests. And as you can see, it's telling us the same thing we've seen before. We're a couple weeks behind Canada and Europe, and the cases are rising very quickly. We're heading for the winter surge in cases that was expected because that's what happened in 1918. So we expect this to rise higher than any of the previous ones, and we will see what happens. But whatever you've been doing to protect yourself and the people around you, you should be doing more of that for the upcoming months, because this will probably be the most dangerous time, at least for people outside New York City. The only reason why I say New York City is separate is because New York City got hit very hard in the early days, like March and April. And so there's now an app in America going to be used in Colorado. This is another one of these apps that have been tried all over the world that use Bluetooth to supposedly tell you if you've been near a person that was infected with COVID. So far, as far as I can tell, these apps are not doing anybody any good. They don't work well enough. Bluetooth is not a good enough technology. And you really need a large number of people to use it and a large number of people to report when they test positive. And as you know, is incredibly obvious in America, we suffer enormously from the fact that a very large number of people do not believe there is any coronavirus and refuse to do anything about it. So all of the mitigation procedures that rely upon cooperation from the people around us are essentially worthless, unless that should change, and I don't see any way that can change anytime soon. So here's where we are. Uncontrolled spread through almost all of the country. Only 2 states currently improving. Only 2, the green ones. And, I probably within the next week or so, California will join the worst category. San Francisco has been a relatively low risk area because of our local officials doing things to protect us. But our nation as a whole is just letting it spread without controlling it at all. And indeed, like in the case of Trump, and I imagine quite a lot of his other Republicans deliberately spreading it. When will Canvas be updated to reflect the new assignments? Well, they should already be there, so please let me know. The 4C should list the pages now. I just uploaded it again, but I'll check. Okay, good, thank you. If whatever's missing in the assignments, please put them there and I'll email it to my grader. I thought it was updated already. Thanks for letting me know. Anyway, this I thought was pretty good fun. This is artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence can read sentences, and without really understanding it, it can make more sentences. So they made this AI bot read QAnon theories. And so here's what they made up with. These are sentences, like days before the election, something big will come out of President Trump's mouth and he will put it back in. They have taken the sentences from the QAnon dumps and made a sentence that is more or less right, but sort of fouled up. So those are kind of fun to read. Apparently tomorrow night, we are going to have a huge windstorm in the Bay Area, which they expect will knock over power lines, light fires, and then fan the fires. And they are so upset about this, they're saying people who live in the Berkeley Hills should evacuate preemptively, because when it hits, it will create firestorms so fast that you won't have time to get a warning and leave. So I don't know, we'll see what happens tomorrow night. I'm not quite sure what I should do here in San Francisco. I may be reluctant to sleep at night. I may set an alarm to wake up every hour or two to check, because I could sleep through the warning if the fire's getting close. We'll see what happens. I would imagine, however, it's like all the rest. It probably won't be a direct fire here in San Francisco. It'll just be a matter of all the smoke. Anyway, all right. So Palo Alto make the #1 firewalls that everybody's using, but they appear to have a sort of stupid legal department, because they have put in their terms of service that you are not allowed to test the performance of the firewall and publish any results, which I'm sure personally is illegal, although I'm not a lawyer. I've talked to my lawyer about very similar issues. I did security reviews of apps who put in their terms of service, you can't do a security review of this app. And when they complained, I asked my lawyer, and he said, you can't tell somebody something like that. That's fair use. If somebody sells you a product, you are allowed to test it to see if it's safe, even if they tell you you can't. But anyway, they're now trying to force people to take down their performance reviews that I guess must be finding bad things about Palo Alto firewalls on the grounds that they don't have the legal right to test the performance. So we'll see if they actually push that. Most of the time when you get a threat like this from a lawyer, they're just hoping you'll back down without actually having to go to court. I don't think they could actually win in court with a thing like that. But we'll see where that goes. So this guy was in a Tesla, and it plowed right into a barrier and killed him. And there's a very interesting thread here, or at least there was quite an accident. I'm not sure it killed him. But anyway, what happened here is this is one of these places where there's a lane splitting off on the left. And if you try to pull into the turnoff lane, but get confused, then you'll plow right into this barrier. And so the Palo Alto got confused because the marks on the road had worn off and drove into the barrier instead of on the road next to it. And the other thing is that there are crash gates here intended to weaken the impact of a collision, but they had been wrecked by a previous accident weeks before and then not properly fixed, which they should have been, so they were not there. This is the one thing common about Teslas that I've heard several times is that when they're on autopilot, they will plow right into stationary objects. This is interesting. You would think that LiDAR could pick that up, or radar, or anything, that you're about to run into a stationary object. They've plowed into it quite a few times. You're not supposed to be doing that. And by the way, they found that the guy was playing video games on his phone while driving. So it's this is an interesting, here's what it looks like. It didn't make it into this lane. It pulled into this area, which looks like a lane and has stripes on both sides, but it's not a lane. It's the in-between area, and you're supposed to be over on the left. So you can see how a computer vision, or for that matter, even a person who's like distracted, might think that's a lane when it isn't. And then they plow right into this object. Anyway, we'll see what comes of this. Right now, the Tesla's self-driving features are very popular among Tesla owners, but they're very unsafe because they are not really good enough to trust it to drive your car. But an enormous number of people do just let the Tesla drive the car. And studies have shown that it is, in fact, a nearly impossible task to tell someone to pay attention and be ready in case of anything happening, but there's going to be nothing for you to do for hours and days at a time. It's hard for people to pay attention when they have nothing to do. It probably would be safer to just not even pretend to auto drive at all until you're ready to 100% auto drive and let me go to sleep and play a video game. Telling a human to be alert but not actually drive is not very effective. But that's where we're at. Another study showed, by the way, that 10% of people driving cars are in fact playing games and texting and viewing their phone anyway. So it is, I know everyone has noticed this. This is a huge problem. Anyway, that's why one possible solution would be to actually mandate that phones shut off when you're in a moving car. And I know my phone does that. My iPhone automatically doesn't put up any alerts or anything while I'm driving. And but you can, of course, turn that off, but it might be a good idea to have that on. Anyway, this is kind of fun. This guy, McDonald's has a API, like every company does. If you have a website, and probably even more if you have a mobile app, there's a way to send requests to the server and get information from the company. And McDonald's has some kind of order on the phone app, I think is what this is. And if you try to order a certain product, it'll tell you it's broken. So this guy reverse engineered it, and he said he hired the cheapest DigitalOcean server, which is what I use for projects like this too, $5 a month, and it queries every McDonald's in America to find out if the ice cream dispenser is broken, and updates this map. So he places an order worth $18,000 every minute. Apparently you can place the order, and then I guess you just never click pay, and it'll tell you when you place the order if the ice cream is broken. So he's made this is called the scraper. And by the way, I'm sure this is also the sort of thing that McDonald's would probably regard as illegal and against their terms of service, and we'll see what happens. Anyway, it is an interesting technical activity. This website scraping is a big issue, and it's interesting to see how well it works. So the Russians, Energetic Bear, which is part of the military groups in Russia, has attacked nuclear plants and the power grid, and now they're attempting to attack our election infrastructure, which we know they've been doing this since before 2016. And so, anyway, they also hacked the Wi-Fi systems at San Francisco International Airport. And they put malware in the system that will infect you when you connect to the airport Wi-Fi, and then try to steal the passwords and such off your machine. So that sounds pretty awesome. And the way they also, since they are a nation state group and not just trying to steal credit card numbers, they had specific targets, probably important people who go through the airport, like government officials. And so they were not doing harm to everybody. They were carefully targeting the high value people and attacking them. So that's pretty interesting in quite a few ways. It shows kind of the risk of insecure Wi-Fi and this group, by the way, I was interested to read about this energetic bear. If you go to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which is part of the homework that everyone's going to be doing in the next few weeks in my incident response class, this is an independent group originally from MIT, I think, and they have listed all the advanced persistent threat groups. And energetic bear is one of them, dragonfly, and they will tell you, they figured out the groups, they figured out their tools, techniques, and procedures, and they'll tell you what they've been doing. They've been around since 2011, and here's the software that they are known to use and references about it. So they, when people attack you, if you're critical national infrastructure and advanced attacks come in, then it is common now to try to figure out who they are. And you use information like this to narrow down who's been attacking you. Anyway, let me talk about the management. And like Vu, like I say, please tell me which assignments you're talking about so I can pass it on to my grader. Anyway, all right. I thought I had it open. We're up to 4B, I think. And somehow I have lost it. We are at 160. And today, yeah, 4B, all right. Because I updated the one on my website. I closed it. Now where is it? Aha, I finally found it. Okay, good. So this one goes 202 to 235. And someone was saying the next one doesn't say what pages it's on. I thought it did now. If not, I can tell you. Next one does, 235 to 257. So if you update the latest version, it should tell you. This is important, though. Oh, yes, the quizzes. I'm glad you asked that. Yes, I haven't written those quizzes yet. I'll put them up as soon as I can. Absolutely. I don't think 4D is up either, but I forget. Maybe I have 4D up. Yeah, I'll have them up as soon as I write them. But I'm still working on the lecture, I think, for 4D. All right, so good. Anyway, so here and you do really need these page numbers, of course, because I've chopped the chapter up into many small pieces. So, all right, good. But I will put up the quizzes as soon as I can write them. I hope to have another one up within the next day or two. Good. All right, so we're going to talk about risk management and risk treatment and audits this time. And here's topics for later lectures. I imagine it'll take the rest of the semester to finish chapter 4, and we may not quite finish the whole thing. It's really quite long. Anyway, so risk management. The point of this is to identify risks and implement controls and whatever changes are necessary to bring risk down to acceptable levels. So you're trying to get along with the business, so you have to decide what your risk appetite is. And of course, some businesses just want to take are very reluctant to take risks. Other businesses like Facebook and game companies and startups are willing to take much higher degrees of risk because their business is not going to be destroyed if they have a security problem. And it's much more important for them to get buzz and get interest in them really fast. Conservative businesses like banks, it's really bad, very bad for them to have a security incident, and they don't rely on having some new exciting feature. They rely much more on being trustworthy. So, all right, when you find a risk, you can accept it, which means you do nothing about it and just let it happen. You can mitigate it. So you put in some kind of control like a firewall or a security identification and access control to lower the risk. You transfer it to somebody else by outsourcing that business process or buying insurance, or you avoid it by changing your business so you no longer do that risky thing. Those are the general things you can do when you find a risk. So you have a program here from your management to do this. You have objectives, the goals of your program, the scope determines what part of the company is covered. Then you have to have authority to expend resources and make people work on this, specify the roles and responsibilities of people involved and the resources that will be used, and then policies, processes, procedures, and records. These are all the things you have to do. So you've got a cycle. You analyze and find out what the risks are, then you treat them, you identify the assets, and then analyze them more. You go around in a loop. So it probably makes most sense to start here. You identify your valuable things, you find out what risks there are to them, you lower them, and then you go around the loop You have to keep going around forever because everything keeps changing. Keep buying more assets, the threats keep changing, and so on. So ISACA has this risk IT system, which integrates with enterprise risk management, where you evaluate your risks and respond to them. All these things are largely the same, the ones we talked about, all these frameworks. So you have to find your assets. One thing that I've seen a lot of companies do is if you just ask them, what is your most valuable asset, they can often answer that. It's like our proprietary method, like Snapchat, or not Snapchat, TikTok. TikTok has this algorithm to quickly figure out what you want to see. So people tell me, I've tried it a few times and I don't like it. But anyway, apparently it does quickly learn what to show you. And that is their main proprietary business. They have some algorithm that is supposedly very good at quickly determining what you want to see. And that's their valuable product. They don't want anybody stealing that. So they know what it is. But then if you ask them, how many copies of that asset are there and where are they all? Most people can't tell you. It's on servers, it's on thumb drives, it's on people's individual phones and their Gmail accounts. It's just all over the place. And of course, you can't determine how to protect it until you actually quantify your assets. So finding out what you've got is the first step. And if you want to consider things like laptops, computers, and servers, it would probably be enough to just group them into this many in this location. But anyway, you have to have some kind of inventory of your assets, and then you can start talking about how to protect them. So in the simplest way, you have a probability of a bad thing happening and the impact if it happened, and you multiply those to get the risk. There are various mathematical formulas used in practice most of the time. None of your numbers are certain enough to really justify doing any math, and you just sort things into high, medium, and low. So threat analysis is trying to figure out all the bad things that can happen. One huge problem is that you have management who is not trained in security, and they do something like go to the airport and walk past a sign or see a TV show where it advertises some new exciting threat. Like the news articles I mentioned earlier where they say some Russian group is hacking people. Then they say, we have to stop this Russian group from hacking us. And this is not real risk analysis. This is foolish. You don't start from a threat and jump right to mediation. A threat is a thing to think about, and then you have to ask, how likely is it that we will attack us? How vulnerable is it? What other threats are there? Is this really the correct thing for us to be spending money on preventing right now or not? You have to have a planned approach, and that's the point. All these bad things could happen, labor strikes, riots, terrorism, a virus, your hardware could crash, your software could have flaws. All these things are bad things that can happen, and those are threats. And you can't respond to threats. You have to respond to risks, which are threats when you have evaluated how much damage they're actually likely to do to us. So you can try to sort your threats into category, like which location will be affected, which type of asset, and so on. Unfortunately, like I'm saying, the mathematical scientific part of this is very weak. You usually really don't know how likely different threats are. Like I really don't know that much about energetic bear. If someone's to say, what's the probability of energetic bear attacking my company? You don't really know. You're pretty much guessing. So anyway, now this is why people that sell cyber insurance, I really don't know how they can do it. Now, if you buy health insurance, then they really rely on a huge amount of data. They totally know based on where you live, how much you drive, whether you smoke, what your weight is, how much exercise you get. They can pretty much figure out what your chance of dying is over any period of time. So they can decide how much to charge you for life insurance. But in the cyber field, they really can't do any of that. There isn't enough history in cyber risk, and it isn't staying the same. It's changing rapidly. So they've got to be pretty much just guessing how much to charge you for insurance because they really don't know how many events are going to be. Anyway, that's the problem here. All you got is educated guesses. So your vulnerabilities are the same. You've got things like out-of-date software, missing patches, weak passwords, extra services, extra devices on your network, inadequate monitoring or logs. Maybe you don't have good enough physical controls on the doors going to your building. These are all vulnerabilities. And yet, can you really say exactly how many dollars per year I expect to lose from having inadequate event logs? Probably not. So you can rank vulnerabilities. We've had a lot of practice at this with software. We've had 2 or 3 decades now of vulnerability reports from Microsoft and Cisco and everybody. And they've made a scale from like 0 to 10, where 10 is the most dangerous vulnerability that lets somebody totally take over the server with no password at all. And then there's lesser things like denial of service attacks and exposure of information that isn't exactly critical. So there's a rating of these things. So that's something moving in a direction of security metrics anyway. And so then you can try to figure out what's the probability that the threat will realize. So suppose we have, we're using Windows and we have an out-of-date patch management. We do not manage to get patches installed quickly. It's 120 days before we manage to put on a patch. So in principle, we're vulnerable for attacks. Then what is the chance that a particular threat group will attack us in that time period? Again, you're pretty much guessing. So then you have the impact. You might be able to do a little better here, and maybe not though. I've seen estimates of the cost of an impact go from 50 cents per record up to $200 per record. It is very unclear how much it'll actually cost you if you get hacked. Anyway, so you try to figure out what would happen, how much would it affect your business if this thing happened, and it's best if you put it in business terms. Instead of something technical like inability to authenticate users, you want to put it in terms that a business-oriented executive can understand it. Like, we'll be unable to process customer support calls. That's much more like it. And this is, of course, what they pay for pen testers and general security professionals. It is your job to take the baffling, confusing technical information and news articles and boil it down to actionable business intelligence. You go to your boss and say, I have evaluated our situation and the threats, and I have decided that we should address this topic, and I have this recommendation. That's what they pay you for. Figure all that out and boil it down to, I could either buy this or buy that. And you can tell me how much they're going to cost and how much good you think they'll do us. It's not science, but it is your job. I felt very offended when I was a technical guy working at an escrow agency, and the boss asked me, how long would it take to do this upgrade I wanted and how much would it cost? And I thought, that's not my job. And then I didn't get what I wanted. And I finally wised up. I said, that probably is my job. I didn't realize it, but that's what he wants. He doesn't want my gobbledygook. I wanted to talk about the code and the binary and everything. And he didn't want to hear that. He just wanted to hear, here's a problem. Here's how we're going to fix it. Here's how much it'll cost. So I started talking that language and I started getting what I needed. So I was learning. Without the benefit of this kind of training, I was learning how to be a security professional. So anyway, that's a qualitative risk analysis where you can't do it with numbers, so you just rate them high, medium, and low, or a scale from 1 to 5. It's a lot better than nothing. So then you can sometimes do quantitative analysis. So you have an asset value, for example, how much it would cost to replace the asset if it's going to be destroyed. Like if you have cars and the cars might be wrecked and totally destroyed, then you just figure out how much money you've lost there. The exposure factor is how much financial loss will happen from that event. So if it totally destroys it, that's 100%. If it does less damage, it might be 10% or 50% of the value. And then you have the loss from a single event. So you have the asset value times the exposure factor. That's how much you're going to lose from a single event. Then you have the annualized rate of occurrences, which is how many of those events you expect in a day. And finally, you get to the thing you want, annualized loss expectancy. The loss from a single event times the annualized rate of occurrence. This is how many dollars per year we are going to lose from this risk. And now you can talk about how many dollars per year you want to spend to lower that risk. This is what it would be in a perfect world where we actually had good data about everything and we could make nice scientific decisions. All right, then there's business continuity planning, where you try to handle disasters like buildings burn down, key personnel leave or get sick, you have a devastating lawsuit, something big happens that is like an existential threat to your business. And so you plan how you're going to survive that. So there are high impact events, which you have to consider. These are the disasters that goes in business continuity and disaster recovery, things that really affect a lot of your business. So there are various standards out there. There's the US government, National Institute of Standards document for risk assessments, and there's the international standard as part of the 27,000 series for risk management. They're both out there. And so then there's risk treatments. So if you're going to, somebody has to decide who the risk treatment is. Now, if your company is really disorganized, it doesn't take information security seriously, it might be undefined. You don't actually have a program, you don't actually have a manager. it's not clear who decides to take risks. This is what really small businesses do with no clue. They basically just accept all the risks and go ahead. And that's having essentially no security management program at all. Now, the next step up, we have a security manager who makes decisions. And this is what a lot of companies did until about 10 years ago. And what happened is the security manager would then become a villain at the company because they just make all these decisions, like we're going to use this particular email provider. You're not allowed to use this particular chat software. You have to change your password. Your password has to be this long. And everybody at the company just hates them because as far as they can see, this guy's just ruining my life with constantly stupid rules and blocking the programs I want to use and messing up the business flow I want to do for no apparent benefit. That's the other way. If you decide alone, you're probably having unexpected effects, fouling up other parts of the business, and you don't know that. So the most mature, wisest thing to do is have a steering committee where you have representatives from the different parts of the business there, and you can talk about it and say, I want to, for example, move all our computers to Macintosh to lower the risk of viruses. And then you'll hear if people say, wait a minute, I need Windows software. My workers only know how to use Windows. I really need things, then you can have that discussion. And instead of making arbitrary decisions that look good to the security manager, you can make more careful decisions that actually promote the business success. At least that's the idea. So risk mitigation is something you do to lower risk, like you're worried about getting hacked, so you put in a firewall, and presumably that lowers the risk, but it doesn't lower it to zero. There's some residual risk. So you do some kind of cost analysis to try to boil down the risk to a certain amount of money. And after you put in the mitigation, you have some residual risk, and then you might decide that you need to have further steps of mitigation because the risk is not low enough yet. So risk transfer, if you do buy cyber risk insurance, this is quite risky. Like I mentioned, it's risky for the insurance provider because it's very hard for them to really calculate the chance of you making a claim. And what they also do is they write contracts which often exclude things. A lot of people have found this out. You go to the hospital, you get sick, and then your insurance provider says, oh, no, we don't cover pre-existing conditions, or we don't cover that particular problem. This happened to me. I rented a car, I drove it around, then I took it back, and they found a star on the windshield. So they wanted me to pay like $1,000 for the windshield, and I had used an American Express credit card that offered coverage. But when I talked to them, they said, oh, no, the person who signed the contract was different than the person who paid for the car, so the coverage doesn't apply. And that's the kind of thing that really happens in cyber risk. Those contracts often have exclusions. So anyway, another thing you can do is abandon the risky activity. Last year, there was another big school shooting, and Dick's Sporting Goods just decided to stop selling guns. They say, forget it. It appears to us that selling guns to people who then might go shoot people and make a bunch of bad press is just a bad thing for us to do. We're going to just give up selling guns, and then we don't have to take the risk of all the public relations problems they're going to get from selling guns. So that's risk avoidance. Just abandon a certain part of the business. Risk acceptance, you just let something happen and you don't care. And that might be okay for small things, but obviously it's not okay for big things like a fire. That's the residual risk left over after your treatment. And then there's compliance risk, which is not direct risk of something really happening to your company, like getting hacked and losing data, but just breaking a regulation. And that's legal risk and financial risk. You might get punished by the regulatory agency. You might have to pay a fine. That's a certain kind of risk. And so you have Graham-Leach-Bliley Act for financial businesses because of Enron, PCI from the payment card industry, and so on, for colleges, for medical businesses. And if you don't obey those regulations, then there is some probability that you will get caught and punished in some way, and you can evaluate that risk. So you have a risk ledger that keeps track of all these things. You identify the risk, you describe it, you identify the assets you're protecting, and then you have some kind of score of how bad is the risk, what did we do about it, and how much did we lower it. And that keeps track of it all. You might start with just a spreadsheet as a way to keep track of this, but as you get bigger and more organized, you might go to a professional product just for this, a governance, risk, and compliance tool. It's very much like your employee benefits and taxation system. It becomes very complicated very fast, and you really need specialized tools to do it right. And then you need audits. Security audits are basically a person with a clipboard, your checklist, checking off a whole bunch of things on your company to see if you're obeying all the rules you should be obeying. That's a rigorous technique. Typically, compliance is where you go here to make sure you're complying with some kind of standard. You can also just have a security review, which is where a less formal thing, where somebody just comes in to look at what you're doing and then recommend things. This happened to me when I started teaching. I might have been at City College. There was some kind of state law where they said you have to have a health check from your doctor to certify that you're well enough. So I went in with this form and he said, "What am I supposed to do?" And I said, "I have no idea what you're supposed to do." They told me I had to get a doctor to say I'm fit enough to be a teacher. So he did something like check my blood pressure and my temperature and say, "Okay, I'll sign the paper." But that's this kind of thing. Somebody takes a look at what you're doing and gives you some kind of statement of whether it looks good or not. All right. So anyway, the systematic process is an audit like this, where typically an independent company, you can do it internally, but it's typically somebody outside, and then they come in. They may interview personnel, gather documents is always part of it, and then they deliver an official opinion, an official report. Here's the results of my audit. Here's what I tested. Here's the methods I used. Here's what I found. Here's the part of your company that's compliant, and here's the part of your company that is out of compliance. And that's all right. CISA is the certification you get if you want to be an auditor. I have heard that there's a great demand for these people. If you have somewhat good technical skills, it's very hard to get technically skilled people in these compliance and financial businesses because they're kind of dull and repetitive, and typically the highly skilled people want excitement. But the good thing about this is it's a 9-to-5 job. It's not an emergency. You get to go home. You get to have a life. They pay you a lot of money. If you want to have a balanced life with like a home life and a work life, this is where you go. The financial industry, compliance, human resources, things like that. That's where it's not exciting like frontline combat. It's just a steady job with a steady paycheck. So this is the cert for that. And it has never been taught at City College, but I'm hoping we'll teach it pretty soon. We have a teacher ready to go. There's just problems with the college, as I've talked about. Anyway, so you plan your audit, figure out what you're trying to accomplish, like typically compliance to some kind of standard, the scope of business being audited. Then you do the risk analysis. You have procedures, gathering data from different systems and groups in the company. You figure out how many resources and what schedule it's going to have. And then you perform your audit. You determine what controls are there, whether they are effective, typically comparing it to a list of compliance standards. Or you might be responding to an incident. So you're specifically analyzing what caused this incident and what has been done about this incident, and is that sufficient? Sort of like the NHTSB, I think, that comes in after an airplane crash. They try to figure out what happened here and have a big report about the cause and consequences of this crash. So you can have operational audits or financial or integrated or information systems or administrative or compliance audit. These are various types. If you are preparing to be in a lawsuit, then you will have a forensic audit specifically focused on the topics of the lawsuit. You can audit your third parties. Almost everybody is outsourcing to third parties like Google Documents and everything else in the cloud, Azure and all that stuff. And you might want to audit them to see if they are compliant. Although, of course, it would be cheaper to just have them claim that they meet a certain standard like SOC 2 and you to believe them. But, if you're more serious about it and you have more specific needs, then you might want to audit them. There are standards for this. SSAE, this is a way to audit a service provider's operations and make a report and then send an official standard to you. So they can have a sort of defined, quantified thing to give you. This is very much like students who will get a certification like CISM, and now they can just say, I want a CISM. If you have that, then that proves you meet a certain standard. All right, so anyway, before you have an audit, you look at all your systems and you get ready for this. The financial business I was at had very good internal audits. I did quite a few of them. Before we sent our final result to the client, we would audit everything and have it all cleaned up. Here's what we did. Here's all the data that came in. Here's all the money that came in. Here's everything we did with the data. Here's everything we did with the money. A total accounting of everything, all neatly organized. Then we give that to the client. And we were audited every year by the Federal Trade Commission. And they said they loved our company because it was so easy to audit. They come in, everything's all ready to go. It's all in one place. We've all got it already. All they have to do is review it and make sure we did it right. They told me they go to other contractors and they just have a mess. They didn't really have it all organized. because they didn't bother to do internal audits first, which kind of shocked me because our whole business was handling large amounts of money and making sure the right thing was done with all that money. I wouldn't want to do that in a place that didn't carefully check everything and double check everything and have clean reports of exactly what we did. And things went wrong too. Things always go wrong. Having an audit doesn't mean nothing went wrong. It means you didn't hide anything. And if anything went wrong, you figured out what to do about it and you fixed it. Anyway, so you have a methodology. You have to have a formal audit procedure, just like a police investigation or an HR investigation. It shouldn't be making it up on the fly. You should be doing a consistent thing. Otherwise, people can sue and claim you were specifically mean on them for some reason like discrimination. And so you have phases. You determine your subject, you determine your objective, the type of audit, you plan it, your scope, and then you perform your audit. And then you have a statement of work defines what you're trying to do here, making sure that the client approves this. And for example, they approve paying the bill before you start. And then you have people to interview, documentation to request, tools to use, sampling rates, and where you're going to store the evidence and how you're going to evaluate the evidence, just like a criminal investigation. And then you request stuff, you get status reports, you have meetings, and you get all the information of all the people involved. And finally, when you're done, you prepare a report, an official report that identifies what you did and what you found, and often has to comply with standards, making sure it covers certain topics. There was a huge security incident at the college about 10 years ago where our chief security officer was a crook and made a fake security incident so he could hire his buddy in crime outside the company to come in and pretend to fix it. And I was involved in trying to correct that. And one of the things that the external guy did was come in and claim that we had all these security problems and submit a report that didn't even have any section on mitigating it. No recommendations. And that is a red flag. That's insane. That's not a proper report. A proper report, if you do a penetration test, it should say what you did, what you found, and then have a recommendations how to fix it. That's just supposed to be there. And if it's not, then you're dealing with a clown and not a professional. So you wrap it up, deliver the report, have a meeting. All this stuff, by the way, is confidential. I mean, unless especially if the company hired you, the whole point is to avoid embarrassment. So you don't just go publish it in the newspaper and tell the whole world. It's proprietary. You tell them in private and they decide what to do. You know, if they decide that they have to notify a government agency because they're out of compliance or make some statement to their customers or something, that is their decision, not your decision as the auditor. Your decision as the auditor is to find out the facts and give it to the responsible parties and then shut up about it. That's why I often make my management classes sign non-disclosure agreements and live up to them. I've had to do that quite a few times in my classes. You do have to learn how to keep secrets, just like a doctor or a lawyer. You're going to learn things that should not be just blabbed everywhere, and you should get used to that. Anyway, so you also, it's a good idea to contact them and make sure that you find out what's going on with them. To try to have goodwill. You know, all security people, even the auditors, should not be hostile. You're basically a business partner. I'm just trying to help you people deal with this incident, help you people obey the rules. You know, if you are fighting with people and they're hiding things from you and hating you, then that's an undesirable thing. It might be unavoidable, but it would be a lot better to take a more positive attitude and say, look, I want you to run your business properly and make money and make everybody happy. I'm just here to help that happen. I'm not here to get people fired and make trouble. That would be a lot healthier. So you got observations and written notes and other information that comes from other auditors and business records and so on. And then you got ways to evaluate your evidence. See if the people giving you this evidence are qualified and if it looks like they've really seriously found this evidence or if they're just faking it. And then you can observe personnel to see what they're doing and whether their jobs are reasonable. This actually happened about 8 years ago at City College. There was a big kerfuffle about us losing our accreditation. And so they actually paid for an external auditor to come in and examine the administrators at the college and see if how they were doing. And they found by interviewing them that most of the administrators in the at the college could not even tell people what their job description was. They didn't know who their boss was or what they were supposed to be doing. which I think any of you as a student has probably seen. If you go and have a problem, they typically have no idea who you should talk to, and so on. So it's that's the kind of thing you find by observing personnel. That's management of an audit of your management processes, which we did not do well on. Anyway, and then you can have a self-assessment, which is what you do at a proper healthy company. You don't wait to get a disaster. You don't wait to be examined from the outside. You internally find out how things are doing at your company. So you have awareness training of people, and you identify your risks, and you get questionnaires from people to see what they think and how well they know things. And then you have training and such. So you're finding out how much people know and how well we're doing. So hopefully you can fix problems before they lead into big disasters and embarrass your company. So let's look at the Kahoots. 4B, it should be somewhere here. All right, 164B, that looks right. All right. All right, good. Let's see, I guess we could have 7. We got 6. I'll give it a few more seconds. All right, I guess this is it. All right, what's the proper treatment for risk with low impact and low probability? You accept it. It doesn't do much harm and it's too much bother to prevent. All right. A bad thing that might happen. What's that? That's just a threat. That's not enough to act yet, but that is the start of information. Bad things that might happen, just a list of threats. All right. What audit prepares you for a court appearance? A forensic audit focused on one topic to prepare for court. Like, Google is getting sued by Oracle, so they'd have to audit, okay, let's get everything to do with our deal with Oracle all assembled and make sure we got all our ducks in a row because we're going to have to report on our business with Oracle. All right, who should be making the decisions about risk treatments? Yeah, the committee would be best. The manager is not the best, although it's better than having nobody in charge. Having a committee do it is the best thing because the manager might not really understand the consequences of their decisions. So risky, you'll have to tell me who they are if they want their points. Phil, that might be a real name. And that's a real name. All right, good. And I see I have Risky's told me who they are. All right, so I'm going to stop the recording.